Hi, this is Mary Kay Keller, Dr. Mary Kay Keller, and I am here with Mark Winkler, who is a nonprofit director, and his topic today is parenting during a pandemic. I'm really excited to have Mark here. He felt compelled to share what he was learning, and he says that most people who are interested in this topic are between the ages of 25 and 55 years of age, 55 years and plus. Mark is a parent and a step parent for 12 years. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology, and he has an organization that serves youth and fathers. He also wrote a book about his parenting experience entitled My Daughter's Keeper. You can find Mark Winkler at markwinkler.com/My Daughter's Keeper. And so with that, now I would like to introduce Mr. Winkler so he can talk to us about parenting challenges during COVID.
Well, hello, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your show, Mary Kay. I think it's wonderful for people to have a platform to express themselves, especially during this time. I think people are spending a lot of time sort of sequestered from their normal routines, and one of those routines is just talking. Right? Just even if it's just light banter around the traditional water cooler. I don't know if they have those anymore, but at offices. But I think people are just used to talking, and so I think that's something that has been sort of definitely corralled in. But people are finding ways to continue that process. So this is wonderful. Look, like you said, I'm a parent. I've been parenting for 12 years, and for me, this COVID-19, this coronavirus crisis, is a very different dynamic. We were forced to take our lives and put it in the four walls of our home. And that meant a change for everyone, for the parents not going out to work, as I'm saying, and then for their children not going to school, right? And that part of that may have been exciting to them in the beginning, right? Not having to go to school, not doing the schoolwork. But then the reality set in that they were not going to be around their friends in a physical way. Right? They still had access to them with social media, on the phone, text, gaming systems that they play, but the actual day-to-day contact. And that we have to recognize is a dramatic shift for them as well. Yeah. So for me, it was, the two things. One, I had to manage my own feelings about, how to, go through and matriculate through this very sort of tenuous and scary process. And then secondly, I had to give continuous sort of hope and inspiration to my children, right? Because I'm that first source, myself and my wife. And so it was about finding balance. It was about finding balance between how I was dealing with it on a personal level and then looking at how my children are being impacted by it. And not just saying that, oh, they're okay, they're young, they're not going to school, they're happy about this, right? Because that's just not the case.
Well, I'd like to commend you for helping them maneuver their emotional world, because that shows an incredible sensitivity into the world of children. I had listened to a podcast by Brene Brown last week, and she introduced the Center Director for Emotional Intelligence from Yale. And he had just published a book called Permission to Feel. And that's one of the things that I see in our entire society a lot of times is we don't understand that children need us to kind of coach them. They, when they're born, they have these feelings, but they don't have words for them even. And then eventually they have to learn how to identify them and label them so they can express them, and that's one of the areas that I think has been so lacking in our culture's understanding, that we can't expect them to know something until we help them maneuver through it, so I commend I loved hearing you say that, because I thought they do need us to understand that we need to reassure them about, their safety and what's going to happen. Their routines all been changed. That level of sensitivity is just very much needed. So thank you for sharing all.
Absolutely. Look, from the day that they are born, children give us cues to what their needs are.
Yes.
They can't verbally express it, right? But when they're crying, that cry means many different things, right? There's a cry of intensity, which can mean pain, or a little bit lower level, which can mean they're hungry. And so as they begin to express those things in words, we have to jump in there and help to increase their vocabulary and help to guide those moments so they are able to then properly express how they feel, but also give them space to do that, give them opportunities to do that. One of the things that we did early on in this COVID crisis is that we gathered our children together and we had a family meeting. And we do that, periodically now during the process. I think we've been in this about 3 months now. And it was just an opportunity for them to talk about what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, because they're on the social media, they're looking, they're talking to their friends, they're getting the same information we're getting, but they're not necessarily have not gone through the process of living and becoming adults and being able to understand this is maybe not true, this is maybe not true, or even taking the time to go and investigate the information that they're getting. They're just reading headlines sometimes. And sometimes those headlines are designed to draw you in, and they can be very scary. So you have all this emotional experiences going on, or this heightened fear, or will they ever go back to school? Will they go back to school in the fall? And so we gave them an opportunity to really just talk about, one, ask questions that they were, had questions about what they've read, what they heard from their friends, or even what they heard from their teachers when they were doing the online schooling, and the process, how they felt about it. So it was two things. One, we can answer questions to the best of our ability. And I always made certain if I didn't know, I would say, look, I'm not sure, we'll look it up together, because I didn't want to give false or fake information, as they say, fake news. But I think the emotional part was very key, because sometimes it's just a matter of expressing how you feel to release that energy, right? Because it's like you feel a certain energy you have, maybe of nervousness before you go to a hospital. And then when you're able to talk to the doctor, it sort of goes down. Or you go into a session maybe with a therapist, and just being able to talk and process those feelings, you can begin to de-escalate and to come down to some sort of level, a normal level. So that's something that we felt that we needed to do. One of the things anyway.
So this was an organic process for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like it. And I want to tell you, I just was just listening to you just now. That process in and of itself, take COVID out of it, is exactly the process that we should be dealing with our children in this country on any topic. Because what you just did, that family meeting, coming together, talking about things. I had Dr. Don Lucas on this week, and he talked about the science of human sexuality. And here's how these two things intersect. Because I said, one thing we don't do a good job of is talking to our kids about human sexuality. They're sexual beings from the time they come out of the womb. And then say, like, for instance, in my generation, nobody talked about it. Nobody even admitted to doing it, even when they were married. They weren't even showing that on TV. And so then they show up in your life, these parents do, when you're 12 or 13 years old, and they wonder why when they start trying to tell you about the birds and the bees, you're doing this, because it was never cultivated. That relationship, that openness was never cultivated. And now they're embarrassed because they don't even know about their bodies the way they should know, but so, and I don't mean to get off on human sexuality, but I wanted you to see how important what you're doing is, and you did it organically.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, to the subject of human sexuality, look, we've come a ways, right? Before, with Lucy and Ricky, they were married in separate beds, and
Yeah,
now
I know.
and now we see a much different sort of depiction of that. But it's still the hesitancy to talk about it. When my daughter started to have, she started to have her menstrual cycle, one of the things that we did was we had a red tent party for her. And basically that was her coming in with maybe one or two of her friends, but with women from, in her circle. And they talked about their first time and what it meant for them, and how their parents dealt with it. And they gave an opportunity to ask questions and then talk about things that she needed to know in that both from the physiological part, the emotional part, and the societal part. So I think when you don't talk to children, you don't give them space and opportunity, they're going to find answers someplace else. They're going to find an outlet someplace else. And normally it's with their peers, and their peers are not getting proper information. So then you just have this sort of whirlwind of misinformation going around, and then they're making their own ideas about how then to proceed. So as parents, we have to be better stewards in that area. We have to make sure that we are getting in front of these conversations and as an honest as we can and without bias, and allowing them to have their moments of, questions and not get, there's going to be some cringe moments, definitely, right? Because who wants to talk about, their daughter potentially having, sexual relations with someone, right? When she's 12, yikes, right? But if you don't have the conversation in a proper developmental way, she's going to find answers someplace else. So I don't want her to do that.
Well, and I'd like to commend the idea of the red tent thing, because, I was thinking about my own comparison when I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I was dying. Nobody had even told me I was going to get a period,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was horrifying. But I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, yes, the red tent thing. She got to celebrate becoming a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
granted, she's not 18,
Right.
at that point, but she got to celebrate it rather than hiding it or feeling ashamed of it. And
Mm-hmm.
other women came in to support her. And I think it's that
Mm-hmm.
community that we're missing these days, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of tribal coming together and supporting each other. So thank you for that as well. That's another great diamond today. So
Absolutely. I mean, and I just really applied the same principles of just being open when it came to this moment that we're in right now. Right. I'm not going to try and placate or shield my children from the reality, but I'm also not going to, scare them. So I just having an environment where we sit down and we talk. And I'm very honest with them. I let them know like how I'm feeling about it. Right? I said I'm nervous at this moment, right? But I let them know that I'm not without hope, right? And I give them reasons why I'm not without hope. I point to studies going on. I point to the developmental things that are in development for treatments or for vaccines. I point to how the social distancing things are working. I help them to look at the graphs. So we're all looking at this information together, and we're all in an open sort of environment of hope, feeling hopeful or feeling scared, and we're just able to talk about it. Okay, I like doing that because I want them to understand this is how they are to sort of walk life when they leave this home. Because to me, the home is a training ground for when they get out into the community, right? So if you don't allow them to express themselves here, if you don't give space, they won't know the value of it, right? And so when they get out, they won't really understand the value of letting their voice be heard. They would be hesitant to let the voice be heard, whether it be in a relationship, a romantic relationship, or a business relationship, or just a platonic relationship. I want my daughters to feel empowered to be able to express themselves.
to be able to have their voice out there and expect it to be heard. I
Exactly.
had like three responses to this. I thought, first of all, when I was listening to you, I thought, okay, so
Mm-hmm.
this is actually, first of all, it's modeling good parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And we often, like when I've had parents call me, because I do family life coaching as well,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they'll call me when the kids are 2 and then again when they're 12. Well, both of those
Mm-hmm.
stages have something in common. Both of those stages, children are beginning to set their boundaries. They're trying to
Mm-hmm.
practice setting boundaries. So they
Mm-hmm.
start saying no, 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 and people are like, oh, my kids always tell me no. Well, who else? Where should they learn to say no? Do you want them to say no to a stranger? Because that's going to be really hard if they haven't
Right.
practiced it,
Absolutely.
Or do you want them to be able to say no to authority at the appropriate moment because you
Mm-hmm.
are the authority? And then I had this other thought, and I thought, you know what, Mark? This sounds like training ground also for great leadership. Being responsive, taking the
Mm-hmm.
responsibility, understanding where people are, responding to it in the moment by setting up the parameters that make them feel
Mm-hmm.
safe, and
Right.
then the ultimate is the transparency piece,
Right.
and so they're not only learning how to be good adults, they're learning how to be in relationships, and they're learning about what leadership is.
Right. I mean, because leadership is, unless you live in an authoritarian dictatorship, leadership or those who are in a position of guidance. And if you're in a position of guidance, that doesn't mean you know everything, right? It means that
Right.
you are there to use your whatever level of expertise you have to help to guide a process. But sometimes that means putting other people in front. Sometimes that means expressing that you don't have the answer, but we're going to find the answer, right? So there's definitely that transparency aspect of it, but it's that open, honest, self accountability aspect of leadership. And again, I use, when I look at the home, I look at my wife. We love to say we are in the process of raising future adults, right? And there's a beautiful passage from a writer, Khalil Gibran, and he talks about parenting, and he says that children are not property, right? And we're not the owners of children. We are, in effect, we're like good. Forget what the terminology is, but people who shoot arrows. And our guide and our goal should be to make sure that we become very skilled and try to aim the arrow in the best direction that we can, and not to stop that from having the best opportunity to fly forth. And so, as a parent, I use examples like that to guide my steps and help me to, order my steps when I'm dealing with my children.
And one of my favorite sayings is on my website is
Mm-hmm.
everything begins in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Society is the result of a collective childhood. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
our existence is and what we're going through right now,
Mm-hmm.
it's the result of collective childhoods, because they're
Mm-hmm.
always watching, even until we
Sure.
die.
Right.
And they're paying attention to us, and they're constantly learning from us. I
Mm-hmm.
do think that this might possibly be the first generation that has more knowledge than we did,
Sure. Sure.
because
Sure.
it's been so progressive and they're learning earlier. But you're absolutely right, because how we treat them is how
Mm-hmm.
they're going to treat others,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to impact the world. So we should be
Mm-hmm.
more invested in these little developing human beings and spending more
Right.
time with them. I
Right.
originally did my first volunteer position when I was a teenager was in a rest home. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's true exactly what I've heard war people talk about, when they're in the foxhole or whatever. And when people are dying, they never regret not making more money,
Mm-hmm.
not being more accomplished, not, traveling more. It is always about their remorse usually is in the area of not having had healthy relationships and spent more
Mm-hmm.
time with people.
Right.
And so, when you see that across all cultures, when
Mm-hmm.
you see that kind of human response to death, that
Mm-hmm.
should teach us a little bit more about how we want the beginning of life to begin. I mean,
Right.
as far as when we have babies and children, that should be
Right.
and that should be the drive to be changing that. So
Right.
anyway,
Right.
I didn't mean to get long-winded there. So anyway, thank you for that again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I agree, though. I think we have to look at we have to look at our children as our future, right? We talk about living forever and longevity, and that's going to come through our children and our children's children, right? And with longevity, you always want to have a healthy existence, right? You don't want to be living a long life and be in misery. And
Oh
so
yeah.
everything that you put in front of your children, you should really think about how is this going to affect them in the future. Even when you're dealing with conflict with if you have a two-parent home, or whatever dynamic relationship that you have, when that's being played out in front of your children, you have to say, I am modeling now how they should how they should interact in a relationship. So you have to be very cognizant of that. You have to be, and then sometimes you forget because you're human, but as much as possible, you should say, if what I'm doing is a good thing for my child to see, for my child to take into the future. And I really do try to live that way. I really do try to order my steps that way. And after a while, it becomes kind of normal. You don't even say that's why you're doing it. You just do it
Right.
that way. So
It's kind of just becomes a habit.
it just becomes a habit after a certain while.
I apologize. I forgot to turn on my battery thing. Mark, we're just going to take a quick break right here. I'll be right back.
Okay.
This is one of those moments I can edit out.
Okay. I'm still here. I just got up the video.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to get the battery on because it was giving me, I should have had it. I think I knocked at least before the calls what the problem was because I always have it turned in. Okay, we're back.
Okay.
Okay, we're back with, I'll introduce you again. I'll say we're back or whatever. You tell me when you're ready.
Okay. One more second.
That's okay. Actually, that was a good pause. That worked well.
Okay, I should be back. There we go.
Looking at this dog, he's about 14 years old. I gave him some CBD oil last night. He got up, ate breakfast, and he's been asleep on the couch all day today.
That'll do it, man.
Okay, so we're back with Mr. Mark Winkler, and we're talking about parenting during COVID.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation thus far. I think it's a wonderful thing to have a platform, especially because we've been sitting around with all these thoughts sort of brewing in our heads, right? And so I think it's good to be able to express these thoughts.
What are some things that that you feel like you're comfortable sharing that have, issues that have come up like around the kids in school and their friends? I mean, we talked a little bit. Somebody I know mentioned that, actually it was my sister, she teaches online and she was getting so many phone calls. That was actually one of the first podcasts I did. And she said she had parents calling and she was like, the parents were distraught, the kids were distraught. And one piece in there that she brought up that I hadn't thought of, she said, these kids are grieving. She said, touch is really important to all of us. And she said, being at school with their friends and being able to bump up against each other and, the camaraderie, she said, they're missing that. And it's great that they can Zoom,
Right.
but then again, parents have to be cognizant that that's not frivolous.
Right.
Them Zooming with their friends, that they're going to need that connection because those relationships are just as important to them as maybe our work relationships or our friendship relationships are to us. So I'll be quiet and let you respond to that. I don't have any children at home now that I'm a grandmother. So, I had to think about what some of the things were that parents were probably facing now. And I didn't raise mine with the internet. So that's a whole new issue. So go ahead.
Sure. I think one of the first things, I had to do early on in the process is really just put myself in the place of the child. And so I had to then project back to when I was in 8th grade or 7th grade and think about the times that I was separated from my class, right? There was a time that, my father's an actor and I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan when I lived in New York. And I was still around a certain set of group of kids, right? It was a new group. But I was away from kids that I got to know, right? So there was this tremendous sense of loss. I could still call them on the telephone. This was back in the late 80s. So it wasn't the internet, of course, but so I could still call them on the phone, but it wasn't the same, right? And I could imagine, even though now kids could see their friends, not being able to be around them, not being able to talk, not being able to huddle in groups, who they socialize with and just have conversations, to run, to play, to do whatever they do. And so I had to say that was a loss. And so when I went to then look at the studies, I had to say, I can't be so rigid and trying to get them to conform to, 8 hours or whatever amount of time they spend in school to have them in front of this computer, right? Doing the same amount of time. So I talked to the teacher and, and the teacher with other parents came up with a plan that there would be blocks of time that they would be on there, maybe from 8 when they signed in, 8 to 10 or 8 to 11, and then stop. And then they would have a break as if they were going outside for recess, right? And then have them come back, not in 30 minutes, but maybe in a couple hours, and then have them do maybe 2 or 3 hours more or a couple hours more. And then that was it for the day. right? And so not really getting them to just act like that something abnormal was not happening. So to give recognition to that. And so they were then, we had put together a sort of a format that they were into, but not be so rigid about it. And then within that context, put together fun things that they can do, right? The recognition that, we still are concerned about your joy, right? We still want you to access joy in this process. As my wife would say, we still have to access our joy during this process. So those are some of the things that, I did early on and throughout the process. And I will continue to do if, we go back to school, not on campus, if we go back online.
I heard a couple of things there. So first thing I thought was empathy. When you put yourself in the shoes of someone else, that's true empathy. And then that responsiveness that you had. But I also heard responsive adaptability is what I heard. And then that structure that they had, that was adaptive structure, so that they still have some structure, but it meets their needs as well as produces the results that you want. Right. Fabulous.
Well, look, I know that things were not the same for me, right? And I know that I was feeling a certain way about that. And I know that children are no different. They have emotions. And we have to look at our children and say, not that we can't say that, their emotions, because they're young, their emotions don't count, right? Because they do. And we see the result of emotions not being properly tended to.
Yes.
We see, we see an increase in, destructive behavior. We see an increase in behaviors destructive on self and others. We see a rise in, suicide attempts or actual, successful suicides. So to say that children's emotions are not important, is it puts you on an immediate, destructive path. And it puts your child on that path as well. So.
Well, and those come from rage, unexpressed rage, and unheard rage, and it builds up like a volcano, and you're correct, then people either act out by, killing themselves or hurting somebody else, murdering somebody else, or being destructive. And all of that honestly goes back from not having some, and I think what I liked so much about that book that I was telling you about, Permission to Feel, is he talks about it in a way that says, look, we didn't have a lot of this information. Like even in the 60s, my parents, we didn't even have child welfare systems in this country until 1967. And that was 100 years after the ASPCA, and they're the ones that started calling people's attention to the horrible abuse of children, And so, they didn't have like as much access. I know we had some child development, but even with that, when you think about the sciences, they've progressively become more because of what we've learned as we keep growing. And so now we just have this amazing information that it's ridiculous that we're not, grabbing onto it and changing the way we deal with children. But, but I do think that, as far as looking at it from a perspective like the permission to feel, he said, we know so much more about all of this. And one of the things that I see is like shame. Somebody mentioned that the acronym for shame is should have already mastered everything. Like I heard you say, you don't do it perfectly, but you recalibrate. And so that's an essential part of it, rather than expecting children to just come out into this world and find their own way. That's just crazy to me. And so that kind of compassion, that compassion that says, okay, we're going to make mistakes, but we can get through this, and we can make changes, in that openness, that transparency. Children resonate to that. They want to please you, at the same time, their brain is literally wired for connection. It's wired for survival. And as they become adults, when we start to feel that kind of, what's the word? Like not necessarily tension, but that tug pull, that's them saying, I've got what I needed for you. Now I want to go try it out on the world. They want to go practice with their friends, and then eventually they become adults. And like I said,
Right.
sometimes I think we think they don't need us anymore. Well, they need us in different ways,
Right.
because like if you get sick tomorrow or your child's an adult and she gets sick tomorrow, and she may have, a husband or another significant other there, but
Mm-hmm.
they also want contact with mom and dad. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, no matter how old we are,
Mm-hmm.
we need those connections. And so that's just so incredibly important.
I agree 100%. I think that the need for connection never ends. It changes, right? It
More, yeah,
evolves, right? And I think as parents, we have to evolve as well, right?
right.
One of the things I like to say, I have to change the picture of my daughter in my mind, right?
Mhm.
Because when she was younger, she was 5, I took a picture of her as my little princess in her little princess outfit. And that's the image I had in my mind, right? But as she got older, when I watched her on the 5th grade stage, knowing she was about to go in middle school, I knew I had to change that picture out, right? Because if I didn't change that picture out, I was still going to deal with her on a developmental a level of a 5-year-old, right?
Mm.
And so when she started coming to me with things that are happening now as a 12-year-old or as a 13-year-old, I would recoil and say, well, that's not my daughter. That's not what she does. When she begins that push-pull resistance, my 5-year-old daughter would never resist that, right? And so I have to meet her where she is. I have to meet her with the new interest. I have to meet her. I have to sit down and listen to her. I have to not just have to, I have to want to sit down and listen to her play the music that she's becoming interested in. I have to listen and watch the video games that she's playing, because what that does is that lets her know that I am interested and concerned and support her in what she's doing, right? And then that inspires her to want to go deeper into it, right? It makes her know that it gives her joy, but it also knows that what she's interested in could be what other people in the world are interested in, right? It could let her know that this could be a springboard into something that she can really develop and do something great with. So I have to meet her where she is, and changing that picture out in my mind allowed me to do that, right? And so I'll be taking a new picture pretty soon. Right now, it's just my 12-year-old daughter, but pretty soon I'll change it out to my 13, 14-year-old daughter.
We'll have to
And that
do another.
includes dating.
I was just going to say that's going to be another podcast. We need to check back in and see
That's
how
another
that's going.
podcast. Right.
Yeah. So, but what I heard there again was both the transparency, but the being present, the checking in and being present in the moment. And I liked your analogy there, because I realized I too had stumbled on that. I used to tell my kids, I still see your face just like you were when you were a baby. But you're
Mm-hmm.
right, you have to change that picture
Mm-hmm.
in order. And I think sometimes, like for me being a single parent, I mean, they were my world,
Yeah.
and it was survival, so that made it more intense. But I realize now that there were times when I hadn't let go of that picture of them being a
Mm-hmm.
baby, and I was still trying to protect them when they needed
Mm-hmm.
to take that moment for themselves and learn how to
Mm-hmm.
protect them. So what I was hearing you say is that you check back in with her, and that relationship is in present moment. It's with acceptance and non-judgment. And then it also, you had this realization that it morphs over time, and that same process when she's 35, or 40 and
Mm-hmm.
starting to hit middle age. And you, of course, have already passed that. You're still going to
Right.
be able to check into her and hear what her process is, and
Absolutely.
and have wisdom there, because by that time we have a lot of wisdom. you know
Hopefully.
yeah, well, wisdom, they say, is what you learn from your past mistakes. So it's like, it just depends on what learning from our past mistakes, but also having transcended those mistakes. That's where wisdom, it's by experience. That's the one thing you can't get out of a book, is wisdom.
Right. Exactly.
So, and at any point in time, you want to go into your book as well, because you mentioned your
Mm-hmm.
daughter and your relationship with her. Feel
Mm-hmm.
free to do that. I don't mean to interrupt your process. I just wanted you to know
Mm-hmm.
that, that was okay to move on to that when you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we can talk about it. I mean, I wrote a book, it was called My Daughter's Keeper. And it was about my experiences of going through the court system and the child protective services to get my daughter back in my life once she had been removed from my life because of, a failed relationship with her child's mother. and the things that ensued as a result of that. And it was a process that took probably, I mean, the court process itself, going to be in the court, was probably probably about 4 to 5 months of actually going to court. But then there was a series of investigations and involving, multiple systems. And it was a lot. It was a very difficult process. But I wrote the book because of the things that I learned during the process. Things that I learned, not so much about the mechanics of the process, but the things I learned about myself going through the process, right? I learned that I was a contributor to a negative atmosphere that created a dynamic where there was a split in the relationship. I took ownership of the things that I did to contribute to that negative atmosphere. So I learned the importance of being accountable. I learned that I could not, in and of myself, solve a problem without the support of friends and family and people who I would come to open up and trust. And that involved me going to therapy. It involved me going to fatherhood support groups, which later inspired me to start a fatherhood support group. I learned that I could not carry negative thoughts in my mental real estate body or bank, because in doing such, I wouldn't have enough room to, really operate from a place of love. And that was the love of my daughter, getting my daughter back in my life. So I had to dismiss those things. I learned I had to deal with, ideas. I had to deal with fear, some fear based and not in reality, and some fear based in reality. The fear not based in reality was that the child's mother, because she was a mother, was automatically going to get custody. That was true, especially maybe in the 80s and the 70s and 80s, but began to change in the 90s and the 2000s. It became, a lot of courts started to look at what was in the best interest of the child. So I had to move away from that fear because it wasn't really truly based in reality anymore. But then I had to face the fear of things that were truly based in reality, me going to court as a Black man and getting, sort of maybe not a fair shake because of the color of my skin. So I had to contend with that. And I had to learn that even in fear, you have to sometimes walk through the fear to get to a desired place. Mm-hmm. So I felt those things were important for me to put in the book. And that's why I decided to write the book. I didn't write the book as a sort of a how to get your child back in your life. I wrote the book more so as the things that you need to do with you have to work within yourself in order to be the best father you can be, to deserve to have a child in your life.
In recovery programs, they have an acronym
Mm-hmm.
for fear. It's called false evidence appearing real. Like
mm-hmm.
our feelings are just basically anxiety and trepidation
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And then the other thing is that bringing that back to the self, that is what adult responsibility is like learning what can we control and what we can't control. And most of the time, what I can control is inside of me,
Right.
And so that's pretty powerful as well. And so I take it from all of those processes and things you learned that was what brought you and her back together. And also I noticed that you didn't once put all the blame back on the mother, for instance, because, regardless of why people separate, I mean, it's just a given. Sometimes we get married before we know ourselves or, whatever the issue is, but it's always the children that suffer if we don't work together for their well-being, and so that is just so admirable.
Yeah. Well, I made the decision, that it was a two-person relationship, right? And there were things that the mother did, but I couldn't concentrate on those things because I was moving to a place where I was going to be a single father.
Right.
So what was going to make me the best single father that I can be? Not a perfect single father, but the best that I could be. In order for me to do that, I had to really do a radical self-evaluation of, myself. And in doing so, I was able to then sort of really the areas that I needed, the areas of challenges that I needed to work on, I was able to find the spaces to do that. And that included reading books, that included, journaling, that included talking to people in groups that I didn't know, but I came to trust and love. And so it just involved me coming out of that sort of man box of I can do everything myself, that rugged individualism that Walt Whitman wrote about, that I don't need anyone, right? So I decided that that wasn't working and that was not going to work. And that's not the person that I wanted to be in front of my daughter. I wanted her to see a renewed man. And so when she dealt with, sort of getting her, her cues or her ideas of what, how men should order their steps in society, I wanted to be a better example. So that's put me on the path to really start doing a lot of self-work.
And then in that process, you can help so many others, because like we say,
so.
we model our lives, and then
Sure.
when we go public with it, other people are impacted, because really the major changes, like you're discussing things you read in a book, and that's the way it happened for me too. But also, just significant moments of hearing someone else who's walked that journey already, and how they saw things, and then it helps people be able to relate to it, in a what's the word I'm looking for? In non-defensive way, because it's honest and it's open communication. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure where you're at in your process. It sounds like we're coming to a close. Do you want to drop all your contact information and any last words or anything that you want to follow up with?
Well, just, I guess I would end by saying that this is a challenging time that we're going through with the COVID crisis very much still alive, even though it's been out of the news recently because of all the marches for freedom and justice and equality that's been focused on. But I do think it's a very exciting time to be a parent, because we have the opportunity to be, a part of history with our children. And I think we should take every moment and really, whereby if we did not spend quality time with our children, to make certain that we dial in and we're tuned in. And you mentioned earlier that, they're the most informed population. Well, they have, I think, access to the most information in the history of time. So I think we need to step into that stream, help them to understand what their information that they're receiving, help them to access their joy during this time. Because recently, me and my family, my 12-year-old daughter came up with the idea of having an awards show for the family. We called it the W Awards, because we're a blended family. You have the Winklers and you have the Wilsons, so we called it the W Awards. So we had that, and we gave out actual, trophies, and it was a beautiful moment. And it showed, and it demonstrated that even during rough times, you still can access your personal joy, right? And so I'm just thinking helping your child to do that, and to do whatever ways you figure out how to do it, just to do it as much as you can. And, if you want to see some of the things that I'm doing, you can access me through my website. It pretty much has everything I'm doing, information on my book, fatherhood blogs that I do. You can reach that at markrwinkler.com, www.markrwinkler.com, and you can, get to know me a little better.
Well, thank you so much for this today. And,
Yeah.
I'd like our readers to know, there's also some place that I think everybody should look up, and it's called selfcompassion.org. They have a little quiz on there, because I really find that the more self-compassion we have for ourselves, like, listening to you, I could hear that part of your change came from just realizing that it's okay to make mistakes. We just have to look at what we can do differently, and so that
Absolutely.
piece of it. But Mark, I just really want to thank you for coming on today and for sharing your time with us and your stories about your family. And then, like I said, now you have an invitation back when she gets through the teenage years. Let's talk about this some more. Maybe we can talk about how to be parents to adult children, because there's a real gap going on in this generation over that. So anyway, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks.